This video is brought to you by Speaking Hebrew online courses for Hebrew learners, Awesome Hebrew Learners, the growing community on Facebook, and Hebrew Monkeys, the one-of-a-kind podcast for Hebrew learners, in collaboration with Museum Tours, bringing the museum to life. Don't forget to check us out.
Or good afternoon or good night, wherever it is that you are in the world. It's really, really great to see you. I'll briefly introduce myself and then I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get straight into our presentation/activity. So I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem. I'm born and bred in Jerusalem. I grew up in the old city next to the Western Wall. I grew up on a wall which is 2,700 years old. So when I look at something that's 500 years old, I go like, that's cute, that's kind of new. So I love dealing with ancient stuff, and I specialize in museum education, bringing the museum to life through archaeology, art, history, biblical archaeology as well. And I just create experiences in museums. And so hang in till the end. I have a special deal for you if you manage to survive this lesson. So there's going to be a special deal which you can email me about, which has to do with the museum, and that's going to be at the end. But we're going to start with with our presentation. Now, this is supposed to be really encouraging you to speak up and to be involved. And so we're going to be doing this together. I'm going to be sharing with you things. I'm going to ask you questions. So feel free to speak up. And we're going to have a couple of like practices along the way to see that we've implemented what we've learned. So let's get started. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Very good. So as we speak, I'm also admitting more people into the class. So you please make sure that when you want to speak, you can unmute yourselves and speak up. So the amazing story of the ancient Hebrew alphabet. So I'd like to get started, first of all, by showing you these scary letters. We're learning Ivrit, we're learning Hebrew, but we're talking about ancient Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew alphabet. And so in order to understand the ancient Hebrew alphabet, I'm going to give you a bit of a background, and that's going to start with what we are all so used to using, which is our smartphone. So let's take a look. So this cute little picture, then and now, hieroglyphics, and today we have emojis, though some of these hieroglyphics are very similar to us today. I actually want to tell you that in the Israel Museum, there was a special exhibition not too long ago, which was called Emoglyphs, which is really talking about how we as human beings communicate through pictures. And that is really the origin of the alphabet. The Hebrew language has a lot to do with this. So I want to define some terms. When we speak about hieroglyphs, what's unique about hieroglyphs are something which is called pictographs. A pictograph basically means there's a picture which represents an idea. So for example, if there's a picture of a bird, that means bird. If there's a picture of a hand, that means hands. Now, the first languages that we have, which started several thousand years ago, we're talking like 5,000, 6,000 years ago, were pictographs. And some of the pictographs were in ancient Sumer, in Egypt, some were in Minoan Greece, sometimes they're until today in China and Japan, we have many, many different images which represent ideas, and sometimes there's thousands of them. Our story of how the idea of pictographs, which was many, many, many pictures which represent an idea, became to be a short list of symbols, which we call the alphabet, really started as far as several scholars. I'm going to mention Orly Goldwasser of the Hebrew University claims that this all started in the Sinai Desert, in the Sinai Peninsula, and that has to do with when Canaanite workers in the turquoise mines of the Sinai next to Egypt were working with Egyptians, and they learned from them their writing, but they adapted it to be something slightly different. And that's where we have, according to some opinions, not according to all, but we're going to keep it simple, the birth of the alphabet. So what exactly is the alphabet? The alphabet is basically the idea of, instead of having a picture representing an idea and having many, many pictures, of having a letter which really represents the consonant, the first consonant of that image. So for example, a snake, and I'm just making this up, okay? Snake starts with the sound sa. So you're going to make a picture of a snake representing the sound sa. And then how many sounds do you have in your language? Not that many. And so these early Canaanites were able to take some of these pictures from the hieroglyphs and to use them for their sounds and then to create letters. And so when we say alphabet, we basically mean a small set of images which represent a consonant as opposed to the whole word. But what we're going to now see, we're going to learn together and then practice, is how some of these images became the shape that they became in Hebrew, and also how that relates to English. And then we're going to practice on some ancient Hebrew alphabet, some archaeological stuff that I like to show in museums. So without further ado, we're going to get started with our first letter. Now, I'm going to demonstrate the first one, because this is one that we won't guess. But from here onward, most of them I think you'll be able to guess. So I'm going to ask you what it is. And a lot of you have been learning Hebrew for a while. I'm going to ask you, what is the Hebrew word for this thing? And then you'll be able to figure out what is the letter. And I think that's going to be a very fun, exciting, and sometimes challenging activity to do. So this we're looking at, they're familiar with, I think it's next to Battery Park in New York. This is a bull. Now, a bull's head, when you count bull's heads, which is something that you do when you have a lot of cattle, it's called an aleph bakar. Okay, an aleph bakar. Now, that's not modern Hebrew. We don't use that today. So that's something I wouldn't expect even a modern Israeli who speaks fluent Hebrew to guess. But I want to show you the idea. So this is from left to right. This is the format we're going to be using. On the left, we have what's called Proto-Canaanite. Proto means that from this language, from this script, many others are going to evolve. And so what I'm showing you here is from Proto-Canaanite to Paleo-Hebrew, which is an older Hebrew, which was used until 2,500 years ago, to a more modern Hebrew, Aramaic and modern Hebrew. And then we're going to look at the English, okay? So this is an aleph bakar. Now, you can all see that this is, on the left, this is the head of a bull, right? And I want you to see how gradually, as the images became simplified, became easier to use and easier to draw and to write and to read, it gradually changed its shape. So instead of drawing a picture of a bull, and it can look like 30 different variations of them, we simplify it to this image. Now, this image looks very, very much like the English letter A. Now, this is going to be easy. This one I'm giving it to you. But from here on, I'm going to ask you to try to guess what it's going to be. And then you're going to be able to speak up. And then we're going to practice this. So if you want to take notes or write down, feel free. But the idea is I want you to remember the idea. And from here, we're going to practice it. So we have an aleph. This is the letter A. And because it's an aleph bakar, it's a head of cattle, it's the sound A. And that's how we have the letter A. And how did the letter A come from aleph? The Proto-Canaanite, which then became the Paleo-Hebrew and the Phoenician, and there were several languages in the region of what is today Israel, or the land of Canaan, was a very important stage in the development of Latin and English. Why? Because we are in the center between Asia and Africa and Europe. And so many countries had to cross through this land. And so the Hebrew alphabet is really what's behind the modern Latin languages of the West, because the country itself was a very important center for meeting between different cultures. So they learned from each other. Now, the Greeks would travel the ocean to Phoenicia, which is in modern day Lebanon, north of Israel. And the Phoenicians were a seafaring empire. They were people who traded across the world of the time with precious materials, gold, wood, stones, and they imported and exported them using ships. And so the Greeks came to Lebanon, came to Phoenicia, and picked up this idea, but they adapted it, they changed it slightly for their language. And then the Romans came and adapted it from there, and there's a whole field of study of how we got the alphabet for today, but it all starts with the Paleo-Hebrew, the Proto-Canaanite, those languages which were born in ancient Israel. So that's the beginning. Let's see our next letter. So what is the word for this in Hebrew? Who wants to go?
Bait.
I thought I heard you speak up, Jerry.
Bait.
Bite.
Bite.
So which letter is this going to be? What sound is it going to make? It's going to be
B.
B. It's going to be ba. Now I want you to see the picture of how an abstract house is drawn. You see there's like a sky view of like there's a room, there's a door, and you walk into the house. And that is the sound ba and the letter bet. And the name of the letter still retains that original meaning because it represented house, not our modern European house with a chimney and shingles and 3 windows, a more ancient house. But this is bite. Now, what letter is this in English? You see the letter B. Now, I want you to see how if you look at the Proto-Canaanite is a little more difficult to see, but you can see how that becomes the Paleo-Hebrew, which is the second one, and that's the Hebrew that was used until, again, 2,500 years ago in Israel, and that looks very much like the lowercase b. The uppercase b, you can sort of see it. It's either laying on the side or it's flipped the other way. Now, in antiquity, in ancient times, we didn't actually write necessarily from right to left or from left to right. It was actually more fluid. Letters were just the shape representing the sound. It was just the alphabetical letter. And you could have written it, the letter itself could be flipped upside down. Sometimes you'd write from right to left, and then moving down the next line from left to right, and then again right to left. So it took a while until it became right to left or left to right, depending on the language. It took time. So it's important to keep that in mind, especially when you try to read ancient texts. You go like, wait, which direction do I need to read this? So this is bet, this is bite, and you see the shape. Let's move on to another one. Okay, this one is a little trickier, but what you're looking at is a broken piece of a clay jug handle. So this is part of a jug handle, and it has a mark on top of it. Okay, it's this mark on top of it is just scratched, 2 lines on top of each other. Do you want to guess what letter this is going to become in English?
H.
H.
Tav.
Okay. Tav.
Or
Okay.
T, yeah.
T, good. T. So I thought somebody was going to say X because X marks the spot, but this actually is T. Now, the word for making a mark on something in Hebrew is tav. Like in modern Hebrew, you can say tavit as a small little, the label on your shirt is called a tavit, tav. And so this is the letter tav. So in Proto-Canaanite to Paleo-Hebrew to the Old Aramaic to the modern Hebrew, this is the letter tav, which becomes the letter T. Getting a hang of it? Good. Because you're going to need some of these. I want you to remember these, not necessarily every one of them, but they're going to come in handy because we're going to practice them along the way. So X marks the spot. This is a tav. It's the letter T. And you can see how the ancient writing of the word taf is how the modern English letter taf looks, even though the modern letter taf doesn't really look like the old one anymore, but the word maintains the meaning. Tav, that's how you spell it. It's tav. Tav means mark. So that's the mark. Next one. Okay. What do you call this in Hebrew?
Gingy. Yelid.
I like gingy. I like yeled. Very good. Let's think. I like that. Let's think more abstract. The body part.
Rosh.
Rosh. What letter would that be?
Resh.
You're getting the hang of this.
Okay.
There you go. Now look how they took an image of a head, and then that turned into an abstract. In ancient Hebrew, it looks like a long neck with a tiny little triangle head, and that gradually became the letter resh that we know today. Now, what is this in English? This is R. Now, in Russian, in Cyrillic, the letter R is actually still written like the Paleo-Hebrew resh, just the other direction because the language is left to right as opposed to right to left with Hebrew. So it still remains, and I want you to see that there's a similarity, which is why I left the low cap R so you can get the idea. So rosh, the letter resh, is the actual head, and that is the sound for R, and R looks a little bit like even the modern R, the modern resh. That's really, really cool. Okay? Now, what is this?
Yeah.
This is going to be yad. Okay. Now, this is a trick one because you'd think it's a yad, there's going to be a few body parts. We're not doing the entire Hebrew alphabet. We're doing a few of them. So you get the idea, you get the hang of it, okay?
Af.
So kaf, okay, very good. Kaf. So what does kaf mean? How do you say that in English? Kaf.
Maybe like palm of the hand or something? Palm?
You have the palm of the hand, as opposed to the whole arm, which you would call yad. So hold on to that thought. You can probably guess what that's going to be. So if we have kaf, the sound is kaf.
Okay.
Okay, and the letter is going to be kaf. And so look how the letter kaf actually means palm, and the Proto-Canaanite is actually a palm. It's like a high five, right? Even though you could say it looks a little bit like a smiley emoji today, but that gradually became this Hebrew, this Paleo-Hebrew kaf, which doesn't look so much like the chaf today. The chaf today looks a little bit more like the Canaanite, but it looks like the letter K. You just have to tilt it a little bit, use your imagination, like, oh, K comes from kaf, which means kaf hayad. It means the palm of your hand. So you took it a simple picture. Everybody, you don't have to be a genius to figure it out if you're in this world, because like, oh, it's a palm of the hand. It's ka, right? It's memorable. It's easy to remember. Okay? So now what I'd like us to do, we have one more. This is a really, really fun one. I love this one. This is one where there's actually a few good teaching moments. So first of all, we all recognize Indiana Jones with his whip. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, this is going to take a few steps. First of all, what is the purpose of a whip? Other than Indiana Jones. Where do we use whips? Where were whips used generally?
For the horses.
Jerry, can you speak up? For the
Horses?
for horses, was that right? Okay, let's say it's for horses. Okay, good. Now, what is it that I'm trying to do to the horse with the whip?
Make it go faster.
To make it go faster, okay. To train it to do what I want it to do. To basically teach it. Now, how do we say to teach in Hebrew?
Lilmot? Lilmot?
Lilmod is to learn, lilamed is to teach. Very good. Very good. Lilmod, lamed. And so that would be the letter lamed.
No.
That would be the letter lamed. Lamed, like, is actually the word for whip. Lamed bakar, it's to teach the animal where to go, how to do, to train it. And so that's the image of a whip. Yeah?
Nachliel?
Yes.
Aren't we saying melamed bakar?
Malmada bakar is another way to call it, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you say lamed regardless to the mem?
Yes, I mean, the malmad habakar, I think, is a device that you put on the bull with some kind of spike to keep it going straight. So it's very, very similar.
Oh, the yoke.
The yoke is called an ol. It's different. A malmad
sorry.
it's a different kind of contraption that you also, it's like a yoke, but it sort of has spikes to make sure that the bull doesn't turn its head right or left and stays straight. So lamed and malmad are very, very similar. Yes.
Like blinders on a horse?
Sort of, yeah. That's what a malmad bakar would be, but that would be for a bull. Yeah, but they're very similar. That's a good point. So the lamed, you can see, of course, it's the letter L. And the directions, remember that something that the directions a long time ago weren't right to left or left to right, as I said. And so therefore you can just flip it and you're like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And you would sometimes read things that people write with backwards letters because it didn't really matter. It's the shape and the consonant, the sound. So lamed is lamed bakar. And now, are we doing the practice or we have one more? Okay, I think we have one more before we do a practice. So we are looking at a wave of water. Water in Hebrew is
Mayim.
mayim. And so this is going to be what represents the letter mem.
Mem.
And the letter mem, look how beautiful it is. From the Canaanite to the Hebrew, to the Paleo to the modern Hebrew. And so the letter representing water in English is going to be
Mem.
mem, M. And look at how similar it is. So the mem of modern Hebrew still has a similarity. It's a little more simplified. It's a little cleaner, but it has that wavy shape on top where you see how it evolved, where it came from. This is a really fascinating thing to see, to be able to put this together, okay? So now let's practice. We're going to do 2 practices like these today. The first practice, so some background. This is a jug. We've just looked at a jug handle that had an X on it, a tav. But this jug is from a biblical city called Lachish. And what it's famous for is what's stamped on it. I'm going to show this up close, and we're going to slowly try to read what it says, okay? Not this one. This is hard to read. But you see there's an image of some kind of winged sun disk, which is an Egyptian symbol. And there's text, there is writing on top and on bottom. So let's see what it actually says. So you're now an archaeologist, you're like Indiana Jones. You found this jug handle, and you want to see what it actually says. So we're going to focus on the top 4 letters. They're a little bit broken, but we've covered these letters. So I want to see if we're able to put together what these letters are. Okay? And let's try to read what it says. I'm going to, second. Okay. So here's one letter. You see I'm drawing. So what letter is this? Look at it like English.
Lamed.
Lamed, right? You can say it also in English. It's L, right? Now here is another letter. What does that look like?
Mem.
Good. So we have Lamed Mem, Lam. Here's another broken Lamed.
Oh.
Right? And here's another one. This is going to be a little trickier.
That a K?
That is a
K?
K. So
Kaf.
how do we put this word together?
Lamelech.
Yeah.
Which means
To the king or to a king.
to the king. Very good. These are known as Lamelech jug handles. You can Google LMLK jug handles, and you will learn all about these. So this is where I sort of, I'm giving you a little bit of a teaser of what I do, because I deal with archaeology. And this is known as the Lamelech jug handle. And there were thousands of them found in ancient Israel from the First Temple period. So we're saying 2,700 years ago. And these are related to the Assyrian Empire from modern-day Iraq. The Assyrian Empire coming in, taking control of the kingdom of Judah during the time of the First Temple, and turning the kingdom into a vassal kingdom. In other words, the king of Judah has to pay taxes to a higher king. Today we say an emperor, right? But then they called it the king of kings. And so one of the things you need to do is to run a tight administration to collect a lot of taxes in order to pay the empire. And these are tax collecting vessels, and they are stamped with the name of the king on them and the name of the cities they were collected in. So this is just an example of how the ancient Hebrew is used. And we are able to now appreciate, we've just applied it and used it. Now hang in, because at the end we're going to read one which has really changed the history books, a very, very important discovery. That's going to be the next one. But before we do that, we're going to move into a few more letters. Are there any questions or comments along the way?
No.
Okay. Well, always feel free. Okay. So let's move on to learn a few more letters. All right. This is a very fun one. Okay. A monkey. Now, this was one that I don't know if we would guess, so I brought in the picture. So the monkey is playing with a needle, and it's a play on words because it says kof hamachat. Now, a machat is a needle, and kof hamachat in modern Hebrew would mean the monkey of the needle. But the word kof actually means something else. The word kof hamachat, first of all, is relating to a particular part of the needle. It's the whole of the needle. The thread, which you thread the needle with, is called kof hamachat. Now, which letter is this going to be? Can you see the image? It's going to be kof, which is what we call the letter kof. Now, look, I want you to see from left to right how at first it looks like, it looks a little bit like our needle, but it's not really the modern needle, because in ancient times they didn't thread such fine threads. They had much thicker threads, and they would they would weave through it. So what you're looking at on the left, there's two examples of the Proto-Canaanite of what they called a kof. It wasn't a needle, it's not sharp, but it's used for weaving. You just put the thread and you just sort of hold that device as you go in and out of the threads, right, to weave. So this is called kof hamachat. Now, which English letter is this? Look at the Canaanite.
Q or P?
Well, it's kof, right? So it's going to be, the answer is Q. Look at that. Q, like in James Bond, the quartermaster. So this is Q. Now you see how the letter Q actually looks like the letter kof, except the modern kof traveled a long way from what it used to look like, but they both come from the same place. And now it's starting to make sense. And so when we're trying to read the Hebrew letters, sometimes just trying to imagine what exactly it looks like, knowing this idea can really help you. Wait, which Hebrew letter does this look like? And you'll start seeing that there's a lot of connections, which is really awesome. Okay, let's do another one. Ooh, so this guy, we all call him, what do we call him?
Hook.
Hook. Now, this is a tricky one. I don't know if this is not the common word to learn in Hebrew, but the Hebrew word for hook.
Vav.
Vav. I think, and so Vav, a Vav is a hook. Very good. And so what the Hebrew letter is, quite obviously, Vav. But the trick one, in this case, the tricky part is going to be to figure out what the English letter is. And in order to figure that out, you actually have to look at the ancient Hebrew to figure that out. Now, the modern Hebrew is not going to give you a clue because it looks like the letter I, and it's not. It's not the letter I. It doesn't sound anything like it. But it doesn't also sound like Va, because we have the letter V in English. It's a different letter. What is this? What letter is this in modern, in English?
Is it Y?
A Y, okay, that's a guess. Now that's based on the shape. Try to find something which is similar to the shape, and then let's see if the sound is somewhat close to Vav.
W?
W, that would be wow, but the W doesn't quite look like this. It's tricky.
Could it be a V like in victory?
Good try. I think there is some history between how V and the other one split. That has to do with how the Latin language is pronounced. There's a whole study. So some of the modern English letters split away from an original letter in Hebrew and became two different things. We have that sometimes, like C and G, for example. So good.
How about you?
Related. I'm gonna. What was that?
How about you?
You, nice try. Not you.
Okay.
No, I appreciate you keep on trying. That's good. It's F. Vav, Fa, Va. They're not so similar anymore, but back in the day, they were much more similar. Now, I want you to see this. There's different ways to make this hook look, and I want you to remember this one because this one is going to come in handy soon. So the Canaanite looks one way, the ancient Hebrew looks another, and sometimes other languages which came from the Proto-Canaanite and developed still use the old one, even though the Hebrew doesn't use it anymore. So sometimes it's good to know what the older one is to figure out what a letter is. All right, so far so good. So let's do a couple more. So this one, a lot of fun. What in Hebrew, what do we call this?
Nachash.
And so the letter is going to be
Nun.
Nun. Nun for Nachash. And look how the snake became the Hebrew Nun, which looks a little bit like a snake. And then the farther away we go, the less and less it looks like a snake. But it still came from the snake. And the English letter is going to be, drum roll, N. Now I want you to see how the N is very similar to the Paleo-Hebrew, to the ancient Hebrew alphabet. In other words, if you were to write the letter N, when you would meet somebody from Israel 2,000, 600, 700, 800 years ago, they would be able to read what you're writing because it looks very much like the Nun, N, even though the modern English Hebrew is a little bit different. Isn't that cool? All right, I think we have one or two more before our practice. I think we have like three more. This is a lot of fun. You know Dora, of course, right? So this is would we call this in Hebrew?
Dag.
Dog.
Very good. Dag.
Dory.
Dory. See, that's why I love the choice of Dory because it's like dog, like dog, right? So fish. So that's going to be the letter dalet.
Dalet.
Now, it used to look like an actual fish, and then at a certain point, somebody came over and ate the fish, and all that was left is the fin. And so that fin became dalet, and that became the modern letter dalet. You can think of the Greek letter
Oh, delta.
delta, very good, or the modern English letter D. And the D looks like the tail of the fish, which comes from the fish for dag. So D, delta, dag. That cool, right? Now let's get into some body parts. Now we already had kaf, we already had palm, and so this is going to be, you want to guess?
Yad.
Yeah.
Yad. Yad. And so yad would be the letter
Yud.
Yud. Isn't that cool? Look how similar it is. So the letter Yud originally was drawn like a hand, like an arm, like a hand. You see that? And then it gradually became like a clenched arm. And then it just became just the hand, just the hands, just the palm of the hand, the fingers. It became smaller and smaller and smaller. But in ancient Hebrew, it was drawn like this second image. And this yad in modern English would be the letter.
Why?
Why not? Very good. So the letter Y. So now we see the Y actually looks a lot more like the Canaanite than the Hebrew does today, but they both come from the same place. Right? Ready for another one? Ooh, this one's a lot of fun. This is so easy,
Ayin.
right? What do we call this in Hebrew?
Enaim.
Einayim. And so we want to guess what the Hebrew and the English are going to be?
Ayin.
What does the shape look like? What letter would this shape be?
Oh.
Oh, very good. So in Proto-Canaanite, it looked like an eye. It actually had the dots. And sometimes they would actually draw two eyes. Then they abstracted it. Why waste time in ink? I'll just make the circle of the eye. And the modern Hebrew is a little different. It's like, what was that? Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So the modern Hebrew doesn't look like the original anymore. We just call it ayin, which means eye. But now you know where the word for ayin comes from. It comes from drawing an eye, which just became a little bit abstract. It's easier to make lines than to make circles. So this is probably how this happened. But the letter O looks exactly like the I. So O and ayin come from the same place. Okay, so this is our final place. Here is where we're going to test our skill. And here we're going to examine one of the most important finds of the 1990s in Israel, which really changed the history books. I'd like to introduce you to a piece of stone, which is known as the Tel Dan stela, or the Tel Dan inscription. That's because it was found in the northern Israeli site of Dan, which is very close to the Golan Heights, very close to Lebanon, and very close to Syria, that is. And I want you to see these white letters that are highlighted here. Let me enlarge them for you. And here's the challenge, to try to read this together, okay? Let's go through this one by one, okay? There's 6 letters here that we need to look at from right to left. So let's tackle them one at a time, okay? First one.
Looks like a bait.
Looks like a bet. Looks like, you know, the English letter B upside down and flipped as well. Now here's the trickier one. Okay, this is a trickier one.
Looks like a Z.
We learned this one.
Ben and nun?
I can't hear you.
Is it a nun?
It's not a nun. No, a nun would be drawn like this. Would be drawn like this. That would be a nun. What we are looking at is this. What was that? Yud. Very good. It looks like a hand. Very good. Hold on. Just give me 1 second. I'm just letting someone who keeps on getting disconnected. Okay. All right. Let me go back to the drawing. So we have bet and yud. So far we have be. Now can anyone get the third letter? Look.
That's definitely a t.
Ta.
Ta.
So what word do we have?
Bite.
Bite. Okay, now this might be one word, it might be two words. We have to keep on going. What is this letter?
A dalet.
Dalet. So we have bait. Now we have da. Now here's the fun one. This.
Vav.
Vav. Good.
And then another dalet, so it's Beit David.
Beit David. What does that mean?
David HaMelech, his kingdom.
Well, it means Beit David. Let's break it down to the actual meaning. We're jumping ahead here. You're good.
House of
correct.
David.
House of
Yeah.
David.
House of David. Now, I want to give you some context so we can appreciate why this is such an important discovery. Let me just clean this up. Why this is such an important discovery? This was discovered by accident in the 1990s in 3 different parts that were put together. And it's written in ancient Aramaic, which is very, very similar to Hebrew. Now, this was written by King Hazael, who was the king of Aram, which is in modern-day Damascus. He was a very powerful king and enemy of the kingdom of Israel and Judah. And he erected a monument celebrating a victory, which we do hear about in the book of Kings, 2 Kings, which is a battle which he has in Gilad, in the Transjordan, where we have the mention of, he says he killed a king from Beit David. He was responsible for the death of a king from the house of David. Now, why is this important to us? In archaeology, in the studies of ancient Israel, there's the question of how much do we know about King David, King Solomon, the first temple? There's a lot of archaeology of the destruction of the temple 2,600 years ago. There's a lot of archaeology about the 10 tribes being destroyed by the Assyrian Empire. We have a lot of that. But how far back can you go? And there are different opinions as to whether or not King David actually exists. People who say whatever is written in the Hebrew Bible is correct will say, of course he existed. And then you have different levels of skepticism all the way across the spectrum to saying it's all made up stories. When you have an enemy writing about you, it's a lot different than finding yourself writing about you, because history is written by the victors. And if somebody won a battle and he takes pride in the fact that he defeated a king from the house of David, that means that there was a house of David. In other words, the way house of David means in ancient Near Eastern lingo, that there was a founder of this dynasty who was called David. Now, we haven't found King David, but we found a mention of the house of David by an enemy, which this really authenticates that there was a Davidic dynasty, and this really changed the way historians and archaeologists look at biblical history, which is what I love dealing with. So it's a lot of fun. It's known again as the Tel Dan inscription, and it's in the Israel Museum. So this is the oldest mention in history of David. And it's written in Aramaic, but it's using the Hebrew word Beit David as the house of David. So that's how we wrapped up. We basically saw the history of the Hebrew alphabet, how it came from pictures and gradually became the letters that we have today, where shapes representing sounds, consonants, and how that is related to the English as well because of the trade connections between different cultures. So that was the end for it today. Of course, we're open for questions and comments, but I said that I have a special deal for you. So if you've been in this presentation, so if you send me an email to my name, nachliel@museumtours.co.il, the information is here. I will send you a special deal for one of my upcoming virtual tours on my site. You're welcome to look up museumtours.co.il. I have virtual tours on topics which are for the general public, some for people who are more interested in Jewish studies. I have all kinds of different things that I'm doing. And I do these regularly several a month. So you're going to have a special deal for you. All you have to do is send me an email to nachliel@museumtours.co.il. And I'll send you a special deal for one of my upcoming virtual tours. We're really going to go through Google Maps and see places around the world and see museums and see archaeology and really have a lot of fun. I have some people on the call here who've actually been on some of my physical tours and museum tours. So I tell you, it's a lot of fun. So that's that. If you're into social media.
If I may add, Michael is very modest. If you'll Google his name, you'll see million results. The guy knows his stuff, okay? He knows what he's talking about. So I highly recommend everything that he produces. And also, I'd like to thank you for having us here and teaching us and being that pleasant. Anyone has anything to add?
כן, תודה רבה, סבבה.
Sababa, achla sababa, bevakasha.
And I caught you, actually, I caught you middle, so if you have anything to say, if you wanted to finish your sentence.
Hi, Orly. Hi, Michal. Hi, Mom.
Nachliel.
Hey, Moshe.
כל הכבוד.
Irina, I know at least 4 people here. That's great.
Yeah, maybe we'll answer some of the questions
Fantastic.
from the group, from the event, right? They posted
Sure. I
questions.
tried to answer the questions that I remembered. There were quite a few. If you want to go through them again.
Yeah, I'll go over them. When I broke in English, one moment. Okay. Okay, so let's see. So Jim actually asked, right, Jim, which came first, Aramaic or Hebrew?
Yeah. So if I did a good job now, you should be able to answer that yourself.
It seems seems that Hebrew came first,
Yes.
but Aramaic was right there next to it, it seems.
Very good. Hebrew came first. Now we're talking about the alphabet, not the language. The language could have existed earlier, but the alphabet came later. The Paleo-Hebrew came before, and then these neighbors gradually adapted that. And so we have the Aramaic, we have the Phoenician, but they're very, very similar. They all come from the Proto-Canaanite and from the Paleo-Hebrew.
So the, what do you call it? Hieroglyphics from Egypt was actually Jewish originally?
No. The hieroglyphics were predated that. Now, not all scholars agree about the following preposition, but this is, again, Professor Orly Goldwasser from the Hebrew University, and it's the conventional idea today that many agree that the Paleo-Hebrew was an adaptation of hieroglyphics to a Semitic language. So we have Semitic people who are working in the turquoise mines for the pharaohs, for the Egyptians, and they learned from them, and they took from them a few of the letters, right? Not all of them, and they created a new alphabet, or an alphabet. And I just want to comment on something. One of the innovations that changed the world is the invention of the alphabet. Because think about the impact that it has. Until today, think about how many symbols you have to learn in order to write in, let's say, Chinese or Japanese. It's a lot. Like Japan actually tried to reduce their symbols to 800, just so that people can, and that's an amazing number for Westerners to think of. Like, how do you remember all of that? Right, but before smartphones and Googling things, people actually remembered things, right? But then only scribes, only the elite, only kings and queens would be able to actually read and write, and that gives them knowledge, power, information. The alphabet opened up the world of writing and reading to the common person. It's easy to learn. Kids learn how to read, right? As early as 2, 3, 4 years old, you can learn how to read, right? Because of the alphabet. It's one of those ideas that changed the world.
So Yehudim started the alphabet.
We don't know if Jews, we call it Paleo-Hebrew as a predecessor to the Hebrew language. But who were those Semitics who actually invented it? It's before the Jewish people. It's earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have Proto-Canaanite, Paleo-Hebrew. Yeah.
Do we know anything about the process from print to cursive?
Today. I'm sure we do. I don't. It's too modern for me. I deal with ancient.
Right.
But there are similarities. There are similarities to the older sometimes. But the cursive hasn't been around for that long. The cursive is modern. It's like less than 100 years, I think.
Right. But we all use it. So when I teach, I always encourage my students to read in print, but to start practicing with a script, because
it's a lot easier. It flows. It's actually, even Egyptians had two different scripts. They had hieroglyphics, which were often carved into stone, and then they had hieratic, which is kind of like a script, a cursive, which is for ink on papyrus. It's a lot easier to write. It's the same language, it's just a different script.
Right. Okay, you guys, Nachniel, do you have anything to add?
It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed the participation. I enjoyed the looks of curiosity and delight. Thank you so much for your attendance and for your participation. And I really hope that you got something from here that you can use.
Yeah, sababa. Toda rabba. Oops.
תודה רבה.
Thank you.